when this stuff works. Okay, platform saying everyone can see that, so I'm going to assume. So if you can't, please do shout out in the chat. All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to play what I like to call almost buzzword bingo, as this is kind of a combination of lean theory, product development, and site reliability engineering, all very kind of hot button topics for the last 5 years, and tries to condense them all into about half an hour and bring them together into something impactful. The slides will run for probably 25 minutes, 30 minutes. Then there's probably about a 10-minute live demo, and then we'll do questions after that, if people are okay with that. This shouldn't run over in any way, but I think the live demo is pretty cool. So hopefully we can get to that. So for today, there's kind of 3 key takeaways I want people to take away from this. The first is very much lean theory inspired, with eliminating waste drives better outcomes. And I'll talk into lean theory and waste and the different kinds of waste in a moment. The second is that implicit expectations exist, whether you want them to or not, that they do. And again, I'll dive into that a little bit more as we go along. And thirdly is one of the most powerful things about service level objectives, and I will define those as I go as well, just to make sure we're on the same page, convert these expectations into concrete outcomes that can be measured and talked about. And through these 3 things, I think you can drive really impactful conversations and valuable outcomes. So I'm going to do the obligatory about me slide, for which I apologize. I'm a principal consultant at Contino. Contino are a digital transformation consultancy that specializes in regulated industries and enterprises. I'm an absolute lean junkie, and I'm also an AWS APN ambassador, so I produce quite a lot of content out and about the space on a whole variety of things, all AWS-centric for that, as you can probably imagine. So we're going to talk through an example and a bit of a story today, because that's what makes a good talk, is having a good story. So I'm going to talk about AWS landing zones, and just, again, I'm going to make sure that we're all on the same page as we go along. But an AWS landing zone is the infrastructure and the platform you put in place to expedite and scale your cloud adoption. The enterprises I work with on a day-to-day basis are operating at 200-300 AWS accounts. I've got one at the moment that's looking to scale to about 600. And how you can build out that platform in a efficient, quick, but also safe way to enable all your delivery teams to operate quickly, and so they can trust in underlying services, so they can work on what they need to work on, not extra things around there. So, and another reason I like using landing zones as the example for this is normally when you look at SRE and where it came from out of Google, and SLOs and SLAs that you see out in the world, they're normally focused at high volume systems, so APIs that get millions of transactions a day. And I want to show that you can apply those principles to your less frequent systems that maybe do some different business use case once a week, twice a week, once a month even. But you can still get value out of this approach, even if things aren't quite at the high, super rapid, high volume space. And I really think these patterns and this way of looking at the world applies across all domains. And just to kind of illustrate some examples, the kind of things you do in the landing zone, generally, like your baseline services are account vending, like I want in your AWS account, GCP project, Azure subscription, choose your flavor of cloud. They all have their analogous option. Access provisioning, so users and access. You don't want people to be waiting a month every time they need a new user or new access, but quite often I've seen a lot of places where that is the case. Security guardrails, so how do you make sure that your access is modeled in the right way so things are done safely, but still enable people to move fast. Often CI/CD pipelines get in there in terms of providing a framework pipeline that people can quickly leverage that gives you a kind of a common vector for doing things. So today we're going to talk about account vending specifically. Just as the example, it works for all of these, and you should be able to extrapolate it to apply to all, but we're just going to talk about account vending today. So everyone, I imagine, is very, well, maybe too familiar with user stories now. But the idea is you can describe a piece of functionality quickly, rapidly, chuck it in a Jira ticket, chuck it on the board, and you'll get to it at some point, right? And I'm not one of the takeaways from this talk is not that user stories are bad, just more that they're not enough. Like, that user story is so incredibly broad on how it could be achieved and what the outcome of that would actually be, that we're going to dive into what more can we do here. So as promised, I'm going to go very, very quickly into Lean, and I'm only going to talk about one part of Lean and then one part of Lean. So it shouldn't be too bad if you're not familiar with Lean. So Lean theory that came out of the Toyota production system, I want to say 1940s. I normally get the date a bit confused. But it got brought over to the Western Hemisphere and became Lean. And it's all about production. And one of the main concepts of Lean is removing waste. And when you look at any process, what Lean says is there are 8 kinds of waste in there. So defects, pretty obvious, bugs, defects in your code, simple, overproduction, waiting, unused talent, motion inventory. Not going to go into all of them today, but they all have their analogies in software development of these kinds of waste. Just by the by, Toyota have been working at Lean for 70 years, and they reckon they've hit 30% efficiency in their car manufacturing process. The best estimates of software delivery efficiency are 1%, which is either depressing or a great opportunity, depending on which way you want to look at it. So today we're going to talk about extra processing. And extra processing is the waste related to producing higher quality products than are required. So this is all about how do you stop gold plating things? How do you make it so you're building something that's good enough? So kind of going back to this user story, it doesn't really talk to good. It doesn't talk to good enough. It talks to kind of a what, but how we actually do that and the properties of what that is, so they're almost infinite at this point, which is not ideal, right? Like, you have to get something that's more concrete, that's more actionable. And really, we just can't answer that question of what is good enough. Like, what says when it's really done? I mean, I'm not going into the done, Jira, agile stuff, but effectively what says that when you pick up the story, when it's moved to done, that it is good enough, but only good enough. And like, who defines good enough? Is it the product owner? Is it the developer? Is it the customer? And really, when you break it down, product management and these kind of questions are all about tension management. There are all different kinds of tensions that exist in the team, whether it's between the product owner and the consumers, delivery and the product owner, the scrum master and the product owner, or even the engineers and the customers, or engineers and security. There's all these different kind of tensions that hold the team in a place and kind of dictate how things work and how things move forward. But again, in that kind of idea of this talk where I'm constantly reducing down, that we're just going to talk about between delivery, so product owner, engineers, and consumers. So that tension where consumers want everything amazingly yesterday, and delivery have to go, well, wait, no, we only have limited bandwidth. How do we deal with that? So again, as promised, I'm going to make sure I define things properly. So when you look at SRE and SLOs, there's kind of 3 different things that go along with that. You have service SLI, or service level indicator, that defines your success and failure. So what counts as success or what counts as a failure? You have a service level objective, which defines how frequently can I fail? And then you have a service level agreement, which is what's the penalty that I suffer from failing too often? Now, a lot of the time, if you're talking internal systems, you're more than likely not going to have an SLA around anything, but that doesn't mean it's not important. SLOs are amazing, and if you get to the point where an SLA makes sense, amazing. But having that financial penalty is more for your hyperscale cloud provider to have, or if you're providing a service for paying consumers like a SaaS product or something like that, SLAs make a lot more sense. If you're talking internal systems, SLOs, and when you're talking about AWS Landing Zone, it's an internal system. Generally, you can get away with just SLOs. You don't have to start playing with funny money flowing around the company or anything like that. And what I think is important is a lot of the time, so in a classic tech style, a new idea gets branded, it's pretty great for the first year. Then it starts to get morphed and overloaded and just starts to just lose the value it had in the first instance. So, I mean, it's happened with Agile, it's happened with DevOps, DevSecOps. I think it's happened with SRE, and I think it's starting to happen with SLOs. And one of the symptoms of this that I often see working in my day-to-day is that a lot of the time people will have SLAs on a piece of paper. They'll have our SLA for this is 99.99 or something like that. You know, they want to be like AWS or Google or something like that. And they're like, okay, we have to have SLAs. But these SLAs only ever exist on paper. They're not actively calculated. They're not tracked against. They're not used for feedback. They just exist on paper. And for me, it's very much like a tree falling down in the forest, or I like to call them Schrodinger's SLA. If you can't measure your SLA, if you can't understand how you're working against it, you don't know whether you're failing or passing. And really that starts to deliver no value because you've gone through the effort of defining it, but there's no actual feedback loop. There's nothing there to actually drive you to a better spot or understand when things aren't going so well. So want to avoid these. And I'll talk about how we can avoid that a little bit later on. So, okay, I've talked through Lean. I've talked through a part of Lean. I've talked through a part of SRE. And I'm going to come back to this user story that we had before. So given this user story of I want to be able to provision AWS accounts, what's the SLI here? What actually dictates whether the account vending process was successful or not? I mean, there's part of it could, the process you do for could break it part away, but really the user doesn't care about that. The user cares about what they see, or the consumer cares. So these need to be consumer focused. So what do? You think, I'm going to be good about this. I'm going to go talk to my consumer and ask, you know, they're asking, building out a new landing zone. What's reasonable? How, like from you requesting an account, how soon do you want it? Yeah, they come back with something. You've given them too much freedom here, and they come back with something truly insane, like very much to be the Aussie that I half am, to go to quote the castle, like tell him he's dreaming. Like 5 minutes is not realistically or feasibly possible. The amount of engineering effort to get here is huge, and that's engineering effort that's spent there that can't go anywhere else. So, you know, you come back with a negotiation of 5 minutes, that's impossible, or that's never going to happen. So you come, what about in a week? Is a week okay? And really, if you look at it from a week's point of view, that's quite a long time to wait as we're going through these modern DevOps journeys with the metrics that we use and the outcomes we try to drive. A week is a long, long time to wait, right? For something like you'll have engineers getting very angry very quickly if they have to wait a week for things. So, and you're having this adverse effect on all other teams that are now bottlenecking around your process because now they have to be able to see into the future, and seeing into the future is impossible. So, you know, a week's foresight in a properly agile team sometimes just can't be there for all things. So, you know, naturally you end up at something a little bit more reasonable. So I want an account vended within 1 business day. This seems reasonable to me, having done them before, and I think most engineers will look at this and go, yeah, we can do that within the day, that's fine. And just for reference, this is 100 times slower than the initial request that they came back with for 5 minutes. And it's 5 times faster than the kind of counter we came with. So, you know, you're able to have these conversations and drive to these points of compromise where you both come away happy. They're going to get stuff within a day. They can wait a day for things. You know, they can normally see a day in advance. I'm going to need an AWS account for that new thing I'm starting in a week, like in a week or in 2 days. Cool. I can put the request in now, unblock myself. Amazing. But the engineering effort to get here isn't too huge either. So this gives you freedom in the team to move to other things. So we've done SLIs. We know what our SLI is going to be for account vending. So SMART goals are something that people often use in career development. That's where I first came across them and have had them told me in every career development kind of seminar I've ever had since. But I think they actually have a lot of validity as a model to look at how you describe things. So, you know, we've got the 5 points of specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time boxed. Cool. So the SLI we had previously, I think, talks to 4 of those. Specific, it says we need to vend an account that's accessible. Cool. Measurable, within a day. Cool. Relevant, yeah, we need account vending, like it needs to be done, and this actively measures that. Cool. And time boxed, we've got the time there. So, well, I just skipped right to the end of my slides. That was accidental. So, but let's just talk about attainability in tech. So 100% is a cursed number in tech. Trying to go to 100% of anything, 100% utilization, 100%, availability, durability, whatever. It's a fool's errand to try and get there, and actively pursuing it can be actively toxic. Like trying to stretch for something that is unreachable when your effort could be better spent elsewhere is really bad. So when we talk about attainable and we go through the SLOs, the difference between an SLO and an SLI is kind of going, okay, this is our success criteria. We're not always going to hit that, and we don't want to commit ourselves to always hitting that. So how often can we fail? So this is when you start to get into the nines territory, 1, 2, 3 nines, 2.5 nines, all that kind of stuff that people are quite very used to now, because a lot of cloud provider services come with 5 nines or 4 nines, and it's all amazing. For them it makes sense. For you, 5 nines probably not a worthwhile investment. We'll kind of talk about how it kind of scales later. But okay, so how often can we fail with account vending? So we want to be able to vend it within the business day, 99% of the time over a 30-day window. Cool. People, are generally very nine happy. Is that reasonable? Again, it's about is that really possible? Do we want to commit to that? Is that something we're willing to measure ourselves by? If we take the case of 99% and say we want to be able to miss that window twice a month, like we've got 2 accounts, maybe something happened or whatever, so every month we can have 2 accounts that fail. Okay, if we have 2 accounts that fail every month and we want to hit 99% on an SLO, we need to do 200 accounts every 30 days. I don't believe there's an enterprise or company in the world who does that, who does 200 accounts every 30 days consistently. I do not think there is one. I'd love for AWS to tell me I'm wrong, but as of talking to AWS, the most accounts they've seen, and they've seen like 1,000 to 2,000, but that's over many years building that up. So okay, 99% is starting to seem a little bit unreasonable here. Okay, so 99% is out of it, but what is reasonable? Like how many accounts are we going to get over a month? And this was kind of based on, general impressions at a client I was at. And where we came to was 10 accounts a month. Historically, 10 accounts a month feels about right. That feels like a pretty consistent pattern we've seen, allows for a little bit of growth, and we'll revisit it if we need to. But now from the accounts, the number of failures we want to allow ourselves, we've hit an SLO of 80%. And this feels now quite achievable, right? Like this is based on realism and based on data and based on what we think and what we're happy to commit to. Because in all honesty, for a delivery team, you want the SLO percentage to be as low as possible because that gives you the most freedom. Obviously, the consumers then want it to be as high as possible. And this is where that tension comes in between the two. So we now have our SLO. We can now, account vending happens within 1 business day, 80% of the time over a 30-day window. Cool. And just to kind of, the general rule of thumb, when people start talking about nines and we're going to build this service that's 4 nines, I keep hitting the wrong key. Every extra 9 is 10 times the investment of the one before it, going from 3 to 4 nines. And this is coming from the people, like the absolute titans of industry, of technical expertise that have gone through this process and taken systems from 3 to 4 to 5 nines. And it's not just it gets twice as hard, it gets 10 times as hard. When you look at the numbers, which I don't have here, but when you go to many nines, you're talking about seconds to minutes of downtime a year. It is insane what cloud providers are able to do, but generally most systems you're building don't need that. And aiming for that is a waste of time and a waste of resource. It's about finding what's reasonable. Like team capacity is limited. Like you can only do so many things at once. You can't do everything you want to do. Again, it's that tension aspect coming through again, that you have to be able to pick and choose. And really, less is more. The less of a commitment you make with your SLOs and the more you're able to negotiate them lower allows you to do more. You could keep one thing at maybe 4 nines, or you could keep 10 things at 80%. One of those is more valuable to business than the other, and you need to figure out exactly what that most valuable mix is. So rather than trying to make everything amazing and using all the latest technology and trying to build this bastion of intellectual might, what's actually reasonable? What do you need to do? What's good enough? Like a lot of the time I always tell people to make things dumb and stupid. Clever is actually an anti-pattern in tech most of the time. Doing something clever is really hard. And the general rule of thumb is debugging something is twice as hard as writing it in the first place. So if you've been as clever as possible writing it, how are you supposed to then debug it? Because you have to understand it at a better level than you did when you wrote it. So a lot of the time it's doing things dumb, doing things, handling the common cases. Maybe you don't have to handle the 1 in 100 edge case, because that might be really complicated to do. But through your SLO, you give yourself the freedom and the capacity to go, well, actually, for these cases, we're going to do something like crank the mechanical Turk, do something different, and try and just make the optimal choices and make choices based on marginal cost about what's going to be most valuable to the business. And like as an engineer, like if you're given a story to work on, which of these would you rather have? Something that you could interpret 100 ways, or something you could interpret a couple of ways? Like once you start to apply these constraints, you start to sculpt the solution space into something that's better understood. This is something that I've done with other techniques as well. I just find this one's really valuable for bringing it back to the business all the time and understanding when you're trying to build these enablement platforms for other people, how they should look. But as I said, I've just talked about having these on a piece of paper and that being a problem. So how do we avoid that Schrodinger's SLA anti-pattern that I talked about before? And this is where we're going to get to in a bit with the live demo in a minute. So the big thing is, why not on a dashboard? Now, you can't debug your system with a dashboard, but you can tell that something's wrong from a dashboard. And, if you have a dashboard that has all these, that allows you to see at a glance if you're succeeding or failing, whatever, and you build it and embed it into your process, which is the other key bit. So if you're doing Scrum and sprints, you have sprint reviews, you have sprint retros, depending on what ceremonies you're doing, you have an obvious spot to bring this in. If you're communicating with stakeholders and you want to talk about how the product has gone over the last month, you now have a very quick visual way of doing that. But it's just finding those points. In the past, I was a big believer in having a giant screen on the wall next to the team that had pertinent information on there. And this would be one of the things that would be beautiful up there. Obviously, we're in a pandemic-ridden world where working side by side like that isn't really possible. So it's important to make sure that these things, that you don't just do the technical side, but you build it into the process and the ways of working so it drives the right outcome. And when you look at these, from looking at them, you can start to make decisions about where you want to spend your time. I'm a big believer in Agile, effectively not being arrogant about what you think is going to happen in the future, and instead just being able to be a lot more flexible with how things are coming and making sure that you're constantly readjusting to make sure you're working on the highest priority things. And this gives you a lot of great insight into how you should be acting. So taking the account vending, say we had that SLO from before, so 80%. With account vending, we're up at 95%. So we've got this 15% error budget. Like we can let a few accounts slip through and take a bit longer because we've got the room there and we haven't broken our expectation. And I'll talk about why that's valuable in a second. But it allows you to do big refactors, like something really risky you want to do, like completely change the way it works and do a massive refactor maybe. Or you want to add a lot of new features in there, which new features naturally introduce risk. So, or you can shift focus away from account vending, going, account vending is fine, it is done, we are not touching it until that number drops. And then you can readjust the team's time to other areas. And one of the things when you start to set these expectations is be wary of inflating expectations. if you set 80% as the expectation, you need to make sure every so often you do tend down towards 80% and not just stick at 99%. Because if all you ever do is stick really high, what will happen is people will set their own expectations again. So that whole process of turning implicit to explicit ends up reversing, because people start to think humans are amazing creatures, but we have a really bad habit of taking past and, then posing a future and looking at correlations and things like that. Just because a system has been up at 99% for the long term, if the team is committing to 80%, you shouldn't be relying on the fact that it's going to be 99%. So from the team, the active way to do that is take some risks, try some new things, try and get it out there, and naturally make this percentage move over time so people don't get too comfortable and too accustomed to a particular level. So if we take the next one, so access provisioning. So again, we've taken 80% as the SLO for this, and we're at 82. So we've got a very small error budget of 2% there. This would be the time to look and start to plan around investing time in paying down debt, building up a budget by not introducing new features, and just try and get it so you've got some buffer space there so you can then take your time away onto other things. But, normally the engineers are crying out for reasons that they want to pay down tech debt, they want to do all these things. This is another vehicle amongst the others that exist for helping to drive those conversations and have the engineers go, well, if we don't pay down the tech debt soon, which is making it really hard to work on, we're going to slip below the SLO, and then we're going to have to actively do it. But instead, we'd like to build an error budget now and go through all that, right? And the third example is taking the infrastructure as code compliance scans. So we're massively behind here. One, it probably should never have got this low. It should have been picked up earlier, but also it's a massive call to action to go, okay, there's kind of two ways out of this. One is we need to invest in this capability now. We need to make sure we need to invest heavily to get it back up. Or was the original SLO, do we still think that's the right SLO for us to have? And the thing is, these SLOs are not written in stone to live for the next 3 years. They are an evolving, iterative thing. You set based on what you think now and go there. So you may have gone, well, actually, we thought 95% was possible, but say these are compliance scans for Terraform, for example, and all of a sudden a bunch of teams using CloudFormation, yet they're still getting counted in this metric. That's going to make it near impossible to hit 95% without a massive investment into new tooling. So how do you want to do this? Do you want to change it so the SLI changes, so you only focus on Terraform? Or, there's options here, and I guess that's kind of the point. But you can have a conversation and you can start talking about these things in real terms with real numbers. Not just, it feels like a compliance scans are low, because to be honest, compliance scans, no one looks at the number if you don't make it front and center with other things. So just bringing these things forward, like it's very much a Peter Drucker, what gets measured gets managed kind of thing. But you drive what the priorities are by putting them in the process and making it obvious to people. And, I'm not expecting people to read this slide, but I kind of put it up there that these are just a bunch of different SLOs and SLIs that I've defined for a bunch of different capabilities for a landing zone. I'm sure everyone on the call, if they read them, would disagree with me on some of them. And that is exactly the point. This is about conversations. It's about driving the right outcomes. It's about enabling people to talk to each other and reach a common understanding, reach compromises, and drive there. Like some people will say the SLOs are too low here, the SLIs don't capture stuff properly. Cool, that's awesome. Those kind of conversations are really valuable, rather than giving it to an engineer going, okay, we want you to implement user provisioning, but not having these conversations. There's so much waste that goes into misspent time, whether it's building things too good or building the wrong thing. So with that, I will circle back to the three key takeaways that hopefully make a lot more sense now than they did at the start. And again, the first is that eliminating waste drives better outcomes. If you can take waste out of the process, and this is just one of the kinds, that you give yourself more freedom to work on things that have real value and true business value, as opposed to, technical people chasing a 100% golden dragon at the end of the day, which isn't really feasible. The second is that implicit expectations exist. Like when you have a conversation with your consumers, they will have an idea in their head of how quick things need to happen, how well things need to work. If you don't have these conversations, then they'll be disappointed a lot of the time. You can't manage expectations that you haven't called out and don't know what they are. So these are really impactful conversations to have to just, establishing better working relationships and drive to better outcomes. And the third is that I've found SLOs as a really powerful mechanism to take these expectations and convert them into concrete outcomes. There are probably other ways of doing it, but this is just one way I found really powerful that's data-driven. And I'll kind of show a quick live demo on a kind of proof of concept on it that shows it's quite simple to really do. To get the dashboarding up and get everything else up as you want, it isn't that hard. This is not like 6 months worth of investment to get here. Yeah, you can probably buy a tool that would do a lot of it, but rigging it up yourself takes a couple of days at most to really get something up and running. So, all right, I'm going to jump into the live demo. Everything I'm going to show you is in a README in GitHub with source code, all that kind of good stuff. So I'll tweet out after with the hashtag with a link to the slides and the link to this GitHub. So if people are inspired, you can go play around with it later. I'm just going to have to reshare a sec to grab a different screen. All right. Okay. Yeah, let's not go to infinity. That's good. So what I have here, and let me just make this a touch bigger. There we go, for here. So what I have in this project, which again is completely fully open sourced on GitHub for people to go and have a look at. So I have the infrastructure which underlies all of this stuff. I have a dashboard which is just running on Grafana, and I have Terraform files that are going to try and create an account. So just assume we're all in AWS. So if I just go to SLO infra here, this is just a serverless framework thing. So if I just set this off, okay, cool. I thought the live demo gods were going to be very mean then to me. So what I'm building, hopefully people can see this, is quite a simple thing. So I have a fake CI/CD process that I'm going to run locally that produces events and puts them on EventBridge. Those get picked up by a Lambda function, which stores them in DynamoDB. And when a business event happens, it will write them to AWS TimeStream. And then I've got a Grafana dashboard that looks at TimeStream. Again, all this stuff is freely available and open so people can go have a look at their leisure. So if I just open my terminal and see how we're going, so it's just creating the stack. Now, come on, CloudFormation, do your thing. So kind of the key to making this all work is just one little bit of Python that for accounts. So this is a Terraform specific one. If you wanted to do CloudFormation, it wouldn't be hugely different. And the pattern kind of follows depending on what you're trying to do. So effectively, the Python just takes the plan that Terraform made. So if people aren't overly familiar with Terraform, Terraform has two general stages that you run through as part of an approach. So you can run Terraform plan, which tells you what changes it's intending to make. So generally you run this as part of your continuous integration where it goes, if you tell me to apply the changes, these are the changes I would make. And then there is an apply stage that you run as part of your continuous delivery that then goes and makes the infrastructure changes in AWS or Azure, GCP, pick your particular poison. This is 30 lines of Python, and it's pretty simple. I imagine most people with any kind of Python experience can understand what I'm trying to do with it. I'm not trying to do anything too crazy. So the serverless framework has deployed the Lambda function, time stream, Dynamo, event bridge, listeners, kind of all the different bits and pieces that I need. So that's like kind of a core set of infrastructure that you can use no matter what your SLO is. You just have to get the events in place. From there, I can go into account folder, just have a look in here. Again, I'm not doing anything too crazy. If I just have a look at the Terraform for a second, where are you? Here. That all I'm doing here is I'm just creating an account. Like, this is the simplest example I could make. So from here, I have you create an account with a particular name and an email is attached. Awesome. If I go here and just initialize Terraform, so it grabs the providers and does all the kind of stuff. I wanted to run from a completely clean slate here so people didn't think I was faking anything and trying to make it out that is pretty simple. So we'll just wait for that to run. If I just look in here, so I can see like my Lambda functions here and all that kind of stuff. Come on. So I've got a Lambda function that is writing to things unknown because this is custom code that's doing this. And there's a Dynamo table, which is, again, a fairly simple one as things go. Okay, so Terraform has finished initializing. So I'm just going to run a plan. So this is going to give me an output of everything it thinks it needs to do, which includes creating that account. Why are you being unhappy with me? Oh, I never assumed an AWS role in this term. Shouldn't take too long to do. Okay, so you can see here, I have a plan. So Terraform reckons that it's going to create a new account for this. Awesome. What that makefile also does quickly is it also takes the plan that was made and just converts it to a JSON format. So now I can start working on it. And if I look at the JSON format, yeah, there's a bit of cruft there, but this has all the information I need to start producing events for someone requesting an account. So you can imagine that if you have a GitHub pull request as your driver for requesting accounts, that now you can just, on that pull request build, you can just start producing these events. So now I've got that, I'm just going to run this Python file against this JSON file and just go create the events that you think I need based on in that plan. So in here, you know, there's just a bit of logging, but effectively it's saying like, I've created this event, I've successfully submitted it, awesome. So if you just quickly hop back to AWS and look at DynamoDB for 2 seconds, you should be able to see that event there. So the Lambda function should have handled it and then dropped it into the table. So have a look, if you go to items, start search. Okay, cool. So we've got a Dynamo item here for the account request. Name of account, has some detail in there. Cool. Okay. And I also have, very critically, a timestamp here, and it's in Unix time, but I know when this happened. I know when the account was requested. So now if I go and fake that the account was actually created, I'm not going to create it because deleting AWS accounts is horrifically painful, but I've just faked that I've created the account. So now I've produced another event, which is this account created event. Cool. It's now gone down the same piece. And now it's here. Cool. So now I've got account created and account requested. They're for the same account. I can see they're for the same account. And I've got a time differential here of 48 seconds. Awesome. So there, from the architecture before, for those people that can remember, and I probably should somehow leave it up on the screen while I'm talking about this. So now the event should have ended up in TimeStream, which is a more recent addition to the AWS portfolio. But what it allows you to do is it actually gives you a fully managed TimeStream database. So in here, if I just go query the table and I just grab everything from the last 15 minutes. So now I have a entry in here that for account lead time for the account called account, it took 48 seconds to go from request to create. Obviously, that's a lot less than a day, but this is dummied out data. But everything you've got here, you could just go and plug into your CI/CD pipeline and it would work instantly. So the one bit I have left is the dashboard in Grafana. Now, this is the one bit that as of right now can't be fully managed because AWS are releasing a managed Grafana service, which is one of the reasons I've targeted Grafana for this. But hold on, I have other Grafanas running. So in here, I've got in code pre-built into the container, I have my dashboard configuration. I have my overalling where my dashboards exist. I also have some time stream bits and pieces set up, and I automatically installed the time stream plugin. So this is an immutable container you can run for everything. Now I'm just running it locally because you could run this on ECS, you could run it almost anywhere you want. But for the sake of this, I just run it locally because that just makes things a lot easier. So if I go in here and have a look, I can see my account vending SLO here that says 100%. I've done out of the last 30 days, every single account I've vended, which has only been one, happened in less than a day. And I can, reconfigure this to look for the last hour or even, last 5 minutes. Eventually that would drop to no data, but this gives me a way of having that dashboard. So you can imagine that account vending SLO, account request SLO, anything else you want to put here, you can just build one dashboard, which is your one-spot shop for how is my product doing? How is my landing zone doing? How is whatever I'm building this week doing? And, we're talking about 30 lines of Python and I don't know, where's the 100 lines of confirmation? This is not a huge investment to get to this point. Obviously, the Python starts to spike out a little bit as you add more event types, but even then you can handle them pretty quickly without exploding your code out to infinity and be able to just capture all these business events in a way that's really impactful that helps drive better outcomes. So hopefully I'll stop sharing so it stops going to infinity, but that was all I had. So hopefully that was good. I'm around for any and all questions. As I said, I'll drop on Twitter with links and stuff later this evening with links to the repo and the slides and all that kind of good stuff if people are curious.
Thanks, Josh. I have a question, Josh, actually. So
yeah,
this SRE especially for financial services, who is like bank like Lloyd's Banking Group, there are so many different teams are running legacy applications. And from your experience, or what's your thought process on implementing site reliability engineering principles for such teams? Like running legacy applications, having a big production support team, and managing the SLIs, or becoming a very big challenge.
Yeah, I think it's hard if culturally you have separate teams. Now, although I am not even quite 30 yet, I do, when we talk legacy systems, I've written production code for mainframes in the past, so I can talk to maybe the oldest systems around, right? I think it's hard if you're still operating, if your developers are not on call, it's very hard to get this stuff in place. And that's kind of one of the biggest drivers I've seen for cultural shift is it's one team, on call is a rotation for everyone on that team. But if you have dedicated support people who are, when you have your level 1, 2, 3, your ITIL style support, right? For these systems, if they go down, that, you need to have the right people on the call. And quite often with SLOs, if you can get them in place, that the way you alert and the way you trigger people is based on if where you are, if something is happening in production and your SLO is going to be breached in the next 30 minutes and you're going to drop beneath, page someone. if your SLO is dropping, but it's not, you're not going to run out of that error budget I talked about for a month, you probably don't need to wake someone up. But still, it kind of, if you can go through this process, I think the problem I have with a lot of things is normally people monitor like CPU usage and people get alerted on CPU usage. I don't care if my CPU is at 95% if no one's noticing on the end, right? Like the monitoring, like you've got to get the SLOs need to go at the right layer. They need to be consumer focused.
Yeah.
So you need to be doing it that way. If you're trying to do SLOs around CPU percentage or whatever, or if that's your metrics, like those are really good for actually diving in and debugging.
Okay.
But they're not the right thing to tell you to wake someone up on a page or to raise a support ticket. Because quite often, you know, you see the ones where you have like, oh, the same support ticket for CPU spikes happened 100 times in the last month, but every time they just close it. It's like, why does it even exist then, right? But it's hard because SRE in the Google sense was about a team responsible for the site. It wasn't just one, they weren't attached to one team. So the delivery team still has a significant ownership of the uptime of their system. The SRE team kind of works across many systems and does that. But what I've found in a lot of enterprises is what they call SRE is just their operations team with a different name. But they haven't read the book, they haven't actually taken on the lessons and gone, okay, this is how we're going to do it. Like part and parcel, an SRE team should spend half the time engineering and half the time firefighting. If you're not doing that consistently, you're not doing SRE. And that's one of the big things for me, because normally it's like, our SRE team firefights 100% of the time. Like, that's not SRE, guys. It's something, but it ain't that. And can we stop calling it that, please?
Okay, so you mean the service level indicators, like you said, like consumer is the key for site reliability engineering. So
Yeah.
any like suggestion in picking up the service level indicators for those systems actually? So what is important, or any aspects that we want to look into when picking up the service level indicators?
Yeah, I mean, if you had like a web application, for example, that you were doing, like what are your core user flows? Like even if you take like Pareto principle, like 20% of your potential flows through your website will account for 80% of your usage. That's probably a good indicator. If you can start to get metrics on what your most commonly used paths are, and look, okay, what would be the SLO SLA for that? What would be the service level indicator for that? How do we measure that? And then start doing it for those, but working on your priority things, which is why, like with the landing zone one I've done recently, we started with account vending because that is, at the end of the day, like the main thing. If you can't vend accounts, you can't do anything. And then we've talked about network uptime and Route 53 stuff and DNS stuff and all that kind of stuff. And like, we'll get there, but it's just part of again, this is building this out and planning this is still investment. You taking away from other things. So it's just planning out where your priorities are. But if your product owner or whatever can't tell you what like the 3 most critical like flows in your app are, you have big problems.
Yeah.
If they don't know that, you're, even if it's a legacy system, right? Like it's still the same. Like what do people use it for? What capabilities does it provide? What would people care about most if it died? If that part of it died, and start there and move out across like how many people are going to scream.
Okay. Yeah. So guys in the group, if you have any questions, you can ask Josh, or you can post it in the Q&A section of the chat.
It's all good if we have no questions. I spoke for a good hour, so people are normally sick of listening to me after about 20 minutes. So
yeah, this is very new for site reliability engineering itself. Very new for the enterprises itself actually, and it is like, so from my experience, what is the biggest challenge I'm facing right now is shifting the mindset of people is very important thing if you want to achieve site reliability engineering, because if you have multiple teams, one for production support and one for development, and production support people they always handle incidents and change request and so many things, but it's very difficult because they're always firefighting with the bugs and incidents and stuff. But automation is the key. If you want to do automation in SRE, then you need to put your hands on the in the code and write. That's the mindset needs to be that's the mindset change needs to be happen in production support team members. I don't know whether you agree with it or not, but what's your
Yeah,
on that?
I think so, right? Like if you look at it, I always go back to Google for SRE because it's their thing. Like everyone else is just using it, right? If you look at who they hire into SRE roles, they are software engineers with operations experience. They are, in terms of an engineering capability, no worse than the other engineers because and like writing code and automation is how you make problems go away. If you try and fill the team with people who just click through things and all that kind of stuff, all they can ever do is fix symptoms. They can never fix the core root problem. And if you can't fix the root core problem, you're just in this perpetuating cycle of you constantly have bugs coming back. So yeah, I work with enterprises where they have like big teams doing business as usual support, but they're not capable and not enabled and not given the freedom to fix the problem. They're constantly on symptom farming, which is a pretty anti-pattern to do. Like you can move so much faster with smaller teams, like but it's hard, right? Like it's similar like DevOps is you build it, you run it.
Yeah.
Like yeah, if you can't do that, you're not really doing DevOps in any meaningful way, and you will kind of struggle for a long time.
Yeah, that's right. And one more thing I'm very curious to know about from you actually about chaos engineering. Implementing chaos in the lower environment. It is, or like Netflix is very famous for this.
Yeah,
Chaos engineering.
Netflix chaos engineering prod because they're insane. I mean, chaos engineering is awesome, but it's I don't know. I want to equate it to service meshes because I like going on about how service meshes are mostly pointless. Chaos engineering is awesome if you're at the right maturity level to get there.
Okay.
I can guarantee that 95% of the teams in order to be able to chaos engineer properly, you're supposed to do it in production.
Okay.
Because as we all know, devil's in the production data. Like you start off in non-prod as you're building up the first capability, but the idea is you should be able to do chaos engineering in production and no one knows.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at what Netflix do, where they'll just switch off a region and have everyone move over, but if you have SLOs and you have all this stuff in place, if you have a giant, if you're with that one where you have had that 15% error budget, if you want to investigate chaos engineering, you build up to the point where you have the error budget to draw down against, because no one can really complain that you've had impacted service for half an hour because you're like, well, actually, all we've agreed to is this. So, by setting those expectations, you give yourself that freedom from experimentation. Yeah, I probably should have put chaos engineering there for the one where you have a lot. Like if you want to start messing around with things, give yourself the freedom to do it. And SLOs and SREs are a really good way to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, people will get annoyed if you start breaking them. But yeah, chaos engineering is amazing. But I don't know, I often talk about security chaos engineering where you start hacking people. It's quite fun.
Yeah, that's right. It's very difficult to implement in a regulated environmental like bank or doing
to be honest,
in production.
I don't get to do it half as much as I'd like to because I'm too busy supporting and helping drive teams up a maturity curve. And it's like chaos engineering is normally 6 to 12 months after I leave. So it's normally like, okay, let's just get your process, your ways of working right. Let's get it so you can release into production every day. Let's get it so your testing and your quality is good so you can build good quality systems.
Yeah.
From there, we can start talking about other things. But, you can't chaos engineer if you're not if you're familiar with the DevOps DORA metrics, if you're not elite, you can't do chaos engineering. Just because you don't have enough of a handle on your system and understanding of your system to be able to do it.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. I think I don't see any questions in the chat. I think it's thank you, Josh. If someone comes with question, I'll pass on to you. And thank you for your time and supporting us. I think we got very few members because it's our virtual meetup and pandemic, and people don't want to spend time in front of computers after work. It is very challenging for us as well. And thank you for supporting us, running this community. Soon we'll catch up in a physical location in London somewhere, and it was a very exciting talk for me, especially, and very interesting. Thank you for supporting us, Josh.
No worries. And anytime, just let me know if you want me back. I'm sure we can arrange it.
Yeah, thank you.